He stood behind that podium with no notes, no script, no safety net, and he was about to destroy his own reputation to defend a woman he had no right to call his. 15 journalists sat in front of him. His communications team stood off to one side with their phones already buzzing. 2 board members had sent urgent messages in the last hour telling him not to do this. His legal counsel had called 3 times, and Julian Mercer, the man who had built an empire on precision and control, the man who never made a move without calculating every possible outcome, stood in front of that room and opened his mouth without knowing exactly what he was going to say. And what came out of him in that moment changed everything. But I am getting ahead of myself. Have you ever met someone who changed everything, not because they tried to, but because they refused to pretend? Someone who looked right through every wall you had spent years building and said, "I see you, and this is not working." Someone who did not perform for you, did not try to impress you, did not play the game you had set up because they could see the game for exactly what it was. And instead of playing along, they simply told you the truth, the kind of truth that nobody else in your life had the courage or the honesty to deliver. Julian Mercer had spent his entire adult life treating love like a business deal. Every relationship was a merger, every gesture was a strategy. Every woman who entered his life was evaluated not by what she made him feel, but by what she made him look like. And it worked, for years it worked, until the night he asked the wrong woman to dance for the right reasons, and she told him the truth nobody else had ever dared to say. What happened next did not just change his love life. It dismantled the man he thought he had to be. And by the end of this story, you will understand exactly why, but to understand how he ended up at that podium, we need to go back to the beginning, to a ballroom in Manhattan, 500 guests, 40 cameras, and a man who was about to make the biggest miscalculation of his life. And listen, if by the end of this story you feel something, drop a comment and tell me what moment hit you the hardest. I read every single one. No, let us get into it. Julian Mercer did not flinch. That was the first thing people learned about him and the last thing they forgot. No, his wealth. No, the quiet empire he had assembled piece by careful piece across a decade of relentless discipline. No, the name that appeared on buildings and foundation letterheads and the occasional magazine cover. The thing people remembered about Julian Mercer was the stillness, the absolute unshakable composure that sat at the center of him like a stone at the bottom of a river, unmoved by whatever currents passed above it. He stood at the center of the Hargrove Grand Ballroom on the night of the Mercer Arts Initiative benefit, 300 guests circling around him in slow orbit, and he did not move. His hands were steady at his sides. His jaw was set in the way it always was, not tight, not clenched, just resolved, as though the muscles in his face had long ago agreed on a default position and never saw reason to change it. His eyes moved slowly across the room, cataloguing everything, every handshake between donors, every flash of a camera, every subtle transaction of power disguised as polite conversation. This was his night. 3 years of work had gone into building the Mercer Arts Initiative, from a concept on a whiteboard to the most ambitious cultural funding program the city had seen in a generation. He had personally overseen every detail of this evening, from the guest list to the lighting to the string quartet positioned near the east wall playing something restrained and elegant that would never compete with the sound of important people talking. The wine had been selected by someone who understood that the point of wine at an event like this was not taste but perception. The waitstaff moved through the crowd in choreographed patterns, appearing and disappearing at exactly the right intervals. Every element had been considered, every variable accounted for. Control was his native language. He spoke it fluently, instinctively, the way some people speak kindness or ambition or fear. Julian spoke control, and he had been speaking it for as long as he could remember. It had started with his father. Raymond Mercer had been the kind of man who treated affection the way most people treat investments, something to be allocated strategically, measured for return, and withdrawn the moment it stopped being useful. Julian could count on one hand the number of times his father had said something to him that was not either an instruction or an evaluation. Love, in the Mercer household, was not a feeling. It was a transaction. You earned it by performing well, you kept it by never showing weakness. And you understood, without anyone ever having to say it out loud, that wanting something real, something messy, something that could not be controlled, was the most dangerous form of vulnerability there was. Julian had inherited that language. He had studied it, refined it, internalized it so deeply that by the time he was 30, he could no longer tell the difference between strategy and instinct. Every relationship he had ever entered had been evaluated through the same lens. What does this person bring to the table? What do they cost? What do they look like standing next to me? How do they affect the narrative? And then there had been Adrian Langley. Adrian was the kind of woman who understood the architecture of power because she had been raised inside it. Old money, old connections, old habits, dressed up in modern clothes. Their relationship had not been a love story, it had been an alignment. Two people who looked extraordinary together and knew it. Two names that sounded right in the same sentence. Two lives that merged seamlessly on paper, at galas, in photographs, in the quiet understanding that neither of them would ever ask the other for something as inconvenient as emotional honesty. The engagement had lasted 14 months. It had ended 6 months ago, publicly, cleanly, surgically, the way Julian ended everything. A joint statement, a dignified separation. No drama, no mess, no lingering. At least, that was how it appeared. Underneath the press release and the composed public faces, there was something Julian had never addressed. No, because he could not. Because he would not. Addressing it would have meant admitting that the wound existed, and Julian Mercer did not have wounds. He had strategies for avoiding them. He stood in the center of that ballroom on the night of his greatest professional achievement, surrounded by people who respected him, feared him, envied him, and wanted to be near him. And for a single unguarded moment, he felt the specific kind of loneliness that only exists inside a crowded room when you realize that not one person in it actually knows you. Then the doors opened. He did not need to look. He felt it first, the way you feel a shift in air pressure before a storm, the way you feel someone watching you before you turn and confirm it. Something in the room changed. The collective attention of 300 people redirected like a spotlight swinging toward a new stage, and Julian knew, before he turned his head, exactly who had arrived. Adrian Langley entered in ivory silk. The dress was simple in the way that only very expensive things can be simple, clean lines, no embellishment, the kind of garment that communicates wealth, not through decoration, but through the quiet confidence of its restraint. Her hair was swept up, her posture was flawless, and her hand was draped through the elbow of Victor Ashworth. Julian's jaw tightened by a fraction of a millimeter. No one in the room would have noticed, but he noticed, and that was enough. Victor Ashworth, former business partner, current adversary, the man who had spent the previous year quietly attempting a hostile acquisition of 2 of Julian's ventures through a network of shell companies and strategic board placements. Julian had dismantled the attempt methodically, without public confrontation, because that was how he operated. He did not fight in the open. He fought in the margins, in the fine print, in the spaces between what was said and what was meant. And now Victor Ashworth was standing in Julian's ballroom, at Julian's event, under Julian's chandelier, with Julian's former fiancée on his arm. The message was not subtle. It was not meant to be. Adrian laughed at something, Victor said, as they crossed the threshold. The laugh was bright and carrying, pitched at exactly the right frequency to travel across a large room without sounding like it was trying to. It was the laugh of a woman who understood acoustics the way a musician understands an instrument. It was not spontaneous. It was architectural. 2 photographers turned their cameras toward her. A table of donors near the front of the room glanced in Julian's direction, reading his face for a reaction, the way traders read a ticker. 2 board members standing within earshot went quiet, their conversation suspended in mid-sentence, waiting to see what he would do. Julian lifted his glass of sparkling water. He took a slow, measured sip, and then he looked away. That was his mistake, and he knew it immediately. Looking away first meant concession. It meant she had walked into his territory, detonated something in the center of it, and he had been the one to flinch. No visibly, no dramatically, but in the grammar of power that both of them spoke fluently. Looking away first was a sentence with only one meaning. She had gotten something from him. He set the glass down on a nearby table, and for exactly 5 seconds Julian Mercer did not know what to do next. 5 seconds, it does not sound like much, but for a man who had built his entire identity on the elimination of hesitation, 5 seconds of uncertainty felt like standing on a ledge. That was when he saw her. She was standing near the far wall of the ballroom, just to the left of a tall window that overlooked the Manhattan skyline. The city glittered behind her like a circuit board, all light and geometry, and she stood against it with the kind of stillness that did not demand attention but quietly rewarded anyone who gave it. She was not positioned to be approached. She was not scanning the room for someone more important to talk to. She was not holding her phone or adjusting her appearance or doing any of the 100 small things that people do at events like this to signal availability or importance. She was simply watching, quietly, attentively, the way a person watches something they are still deciding how to feel about. Like someone sitting in a theater during the second act, absorbed but not yet committed, taking it all in before forming a judgment. Her dress was deep emerald green, understated but striking, the kind of color that does not shout but does not whisper either. It simply speaks at exactly the right volume. The light from the chandelier caught the edge of her collarbone and the curve of her shoulder, and for a moment she looked less like a guest at a gala and more like someone who had been painted into the scene by an artist who understood that the most compelling figure in any composition is the one who is not trying to be seen. There was a glass in her hand, barely touched. Julian recognized her, no from any social circle, no from any previous event. He recognized her from the briefing folder his foundation director had prepared 2 months earlier. Naomi Okafor, independent cultural strategist. She had been brought in to advise on the community engagement arm of the arts initiative, audience development, outreach design, grassroots integration, the work that happened far from ballrooms and press conferences, the work that actually reached people. His director had described her in terms Julian rarely heard applied to consultants. Brilliant, he had said, precise. Impossible to oversell to. She does not chase attention. She builds things that earn it. Julian set his jaw and crossed the room. She saw him coming. Her eyes tracked his approach without surprise, without adjustment, without the anticipatory performance that most people unconsciously activated when someone like Julian Mercer walked toward them. She did not straighten her posture. She did not smile preemptively. She did not angle her body toward him in welcome. She simply stood where she was and waited the way someone waits for a sentence to finish before deciding whether to respond. He stopped in front of her, close enough to speak without raising his voice, far enough to respect the boundary her body language had quietly established. "Dance with me," he said. She looked at him, no, up at him, no, past him, directly into his face, with the calm, unhurried focus of someone who had absolutely no interest in performing. The silence that followed lasted long enough to become a statement of its own. It sat between them, like an object placed on a table, something solid, something real, something that could not be ignored. "Why?" she asked. The word landed like a single note played in an empty room. It was not hostile. It was not coy. It was not flirtatious or suspicious or confrontational. It was simply honest. The most honest question anyone had asked him all evening, and it hit harder than anything Adrian had brought through those doors. Julian hesitated. The hesitation lasted less than a second, but it cost him because she saw it. He watched her see it. He watched the recognition register in her eyes, the quiet understanding that his request was not what it appeared to be, that there was something underneath it, and she had identified it before he had even finished asking. "Because I need the room to stop watching me stand still," he said. She tilted her head slightly to one side. "So I am a distraction. You are the only person in this room who is not performing," he said. Something shifted behind her eyes. A door opening, or perhaps a door being tested before a decision was made about whether to open it. She studied him for a moment with an expression that held no judgment and no warmth, just assessment. Pure, clear, uncontaminated assessment. "One dance," she said, "and I am not doing it for you." She set her glass down on the window ledge beside her. The gesture was unhurried. She did not glance at the room. She did not check to see who was watching. She simply stepped forward, and within seconds every photographer in the ballroom had found them, because Julian Mercer did not dance. No at galas, no at benefits, no at his own events. It was one of those facts about him that had calcified into legend, repeated so often at so many gatherings that it had become part of his public identity, like his punctuality, or his composure, or his refusal to drink alcohol at professional functions. Julian Mercer does not dance. Everyone knew it. It was simply understood. Which meant that when the man who never danced stepped onto the floor with a woman no one recognized, the room did not just shift. It held its breath. His hand settled at the curve of her back. Her fingers rested lightly in his. They moved with the music, something slow, something built on strings and restraint, and for a few measured beats it felt exactly like what it was. Two people performing proximity, a man using a woman as a tool, a calculated gesture dressed in the language of intimacy. And then she spoke. "You are still thinking about her." His grip tightened by a fraction before he caught himself. "Excuse me, you asked me to dance because she walked in," Naomi said. Her voice was low and even not unkind, just precise, like a surgeon identifying the exact location of an incision before making it. "That means she is still directing the scene. You just changed the choreography." Silence. No one spoke to Julian Mercer like that. No, his legal team. No, his board of directors. No, his communications staff. No, anyone who still wanted something from him, which was everyone, because everyone always wanted something from him. That was the nature of the world he inhabited. Every conversation was a negotiation. Every interaction was a transaction. And no one had ever stood this close to him and told him the truth about what he was doing while he was doing it. "You do not know what she wanted," he said. "I know what you are doing," Naomi replied. "And I know what it looks like from the outside. So does everyone with a camera." For 30 full seconds he said nothing. The music carried them forward in its slow current. The room continued its orbit around them. Photographers repositioned. Guests pretended not to watch while watching intently. And somewhere in the middle of that silence, something happened inside Julian Mercer that he had not anticipated and could not have controlled. It was not dramatic. There was no sudden revelation, no cinematic moment of clarity. It was quieter than that, smaller, more honest. It was the sensation of a single bolt coming loose in a machine that had been running too tight for too long. A tiny structural failure in the architecture of his control, so small that no one else in the room could have seen it, but he felt it, and she felt it too, because she was close enough to notice the almost imperceptible change in the tension of his shoulders. He stopped thinking about Adrian. He started paying attention to the woman in front of him. What struck him first was what she did not do. She did not ask about Adrian. She did not reach for the story, the backstory, the details. She did not try to unlock him with curiosity or flattery or the performative vulnerability that he had learned to recognize and distrust in equal measure. She simply steady, her eyes calm, her posture relaxed, her hand resting in his without grasping. And she let the silence between them become a space rather than a gap. She let it breathe. She let it exist without rushing to fill it with something more comfortable. And in that silence, Julian felt something he had not felt in years. He felt seen. The way a person is seen when someone looks at them without wanting anything from them. The song ended. Naomi stepped back, naturally. No lingering, no added meaning, no gesture designed to extend the moment beyond its natural life. "Thank you for the dance," she said. And without waiting for him to respond, without looking back, without any of the small performances that people use to signal that a moment mattered more than they are willing to say, she walked back toward the window where she had been standing. Julian remained on the floor for a moment longer than was comfortable. He stood there with his hands at his sides and the room reassembling itself around him, and a feeling in his chest that he could not name. 2 cameras captured it. The image of Julian Mercer standing alone on a dance floor, looking in the direction of a woman who had already turned away, would become the photograph that changed everything. By morning the photos were everywhere. Julian Mercer's mystery woman, who is she? The billionaire who never dances, just changed the conversation. Sterling makes a move with unknown guest. The headlines wrote themselves the way headlines always do when the story is simpler than the truth. By 9 in the morning, Naomi Okafor's name had been surfaced. Her professional profile had been pulled apart and reassembled in the language of tabloid speculation. Her consulting work for the Arts Initiative had been reframed, not as expertise but as proximity, not as professional contribution but as strategic positioning. Someone online had already speculated that she had been placed at the event by Julian's PR team, a willing participant in his post-breakup image rehabilitation, a more cooperative accessory, a calculated prop. 7 years. Naomi had spent 7 years building her reputation, deliberately, carefully, without spectacle and without shortcuts. She had earned every client through the quality of her work, not the visibility of her associations. She had built something small and meaningful and entirely her own. And in one evening, without her consent, without her input, without her control, someone else's narrative had swallowed hers whole. She sat at her kitchen counter that morning with her tea growing cold and her phone vibrating with numbers she did not recognize. Her inbox was already full. Her company's social media page had been tagged in dozens of posts overnight. 2 clients had sent cautious messages asking if everything was all right, which was the professional equivalent of asking whether she was still someone they could trust. She closed her laptop. She sat with the silence for a moment. Then she picked up her phone and called the one number she had for him. He answered before the second ring finished. "This ends now," she said. Julian was already in the back of a town car when the call came through. His tablet was open to every headline. His assistant sat beside him with a stack of drafted responses. 3 containment strategies had been proposed. 2 official statements had been written, reviewed, and formatted for distribution. Everything was ready. Every possible angle had been anticipated. Every variable had been accounted for. And then Naomi said, "This ends now," and every strategy he had prepared dissolved like ink in water. "Let me send her," he started. "Do not," she said. Her voice was steady, controlled. But something lived underneath it, not fear, not fragility, but the precise white-hot anger of a woman who had spent years building something in private and had just watched it get demolished in public without anyone asking her permission. "I did not agree to any of this, Julian." "I know," he said. "Then fix it." She hung up. He sat with the dead line for a long time. The car moved through morning traffic. His assistant waited for instructions. The drafted statements sat in a folder on the seat between them, and Julian, for the second time in as many days, found himself in a place he did not recognize. A place where his tools did not work. A place where the right move was not obvious because the situation was not strategic. It was personal, and he had never been equipped for personal. He told his driver to turn around. "No, I want you to pause for a second. Put yourself in Naomi's shoes. You did not ask for any of this. You went to an event as a professional. You agreed to one dance because a man you barely knew asked you honestly. And now your name is in headlines. Your work is being questioned. Your clients are wondering if you can still be trusted. And the man who caused all of it is a billionaire who used you as a prop in his own performance. What would you do? Drop your answer in the comments. And if you think you already know where this story is going, trust me, you do not. Keep watching. He sent flowers the next afternoon. White orchids, no card. Just his name written once on the delivery note. It was the kind of gesture he had made before, with other women in other situations. A reliable move from a reliable playbook. Send something beautiful. Keep it restrained. Let the gesture speak for itself. She did not respond. His team issued a brief press statement attributing the attention to a misunderstanding and emphasizing Naomi's professional contributions to the Arts Initiative. The statement was clean, well-crafted, and completely ineffective. The internet had already chosen its story, and no corporate release was going to compete with a photograph of Julian Mercer looking at a woman like he had just remembered what honesty felt like. 3 days passed. 3 days during which Julian operated in the professional world with the same precision and discipline he always had, attending meetings, reviewing proposals, making decisions that affected hundreds of employees and millions of dollars. And at night, alone in the apartment that took up the entire top floor of a building he owned, he sat with a feeling he could not manage and could not strategize away. On the 3rd day, he went to her, no through a representative, no through a scheduled appointment, no through any of the channels that a man like Julian Mercer typically used to access people. He went himself, in person, alone, and he stood in the small, sun-filled reception area of her consulting firm, a 2-room suite above a bookshop in Harlem, and he waited. The contrast was immediate and deliberate, and he understood it. Her office had no glass walls, no corner views of the skyline, no assistants in tailored suits, no waiting area designed to communicate wealth and importance. There were bookshelves along one wall, filled not with decorative volumes, but with books that had been read, marked, returned to. There was a small desk near the front where a young woman sat answering phones. There was light coming through 2 large windows, warm and unfiltered, the kind of light that commercial architects spend thousands trying to replicate and never quite achieve because it cannot be designed. It can only be allowed. He stood in that space, and he waited, and she made him wait 14 minutes. 14 minutes. For a man who controlled every second of his schedule, who moved through the world in 15-minute increments, who had assistants whose entire job was to ensure that no moment of his day was wasted, 14 minutes of standing in a small reception area with nothing to do and no one to perform for was a very long time. Long enough to notice the way the light changed as a cloud passed outside the window, long enough to read the spines of the books on the shelf nearest to him, long enough to understand that this was not an accident. She was not running behind. She was making a choice, and the choice was to let him experience, even briefly, what it felt like to exist in someone else's timeline instead of his own. When she came out, she did not invite him to sit. She stood near the doorway of her office with her arms at her sides. Her expression was composed but not neutral. It was the face of someone who had spent 3 days deciding the exact weight and placement of every word she was about to deliver. "I need you to hear me clearly," she said. "I am listening," he said. "You walked up to me at that gala, and you made a calculation. I was a useful variable. You needed the room to see something, so you used me to show it to them. You did not ask me what I wanted. You did not consider what it would cost me. You saw a tool that fit the moment, and you picked it up." She paused. "No, for effect, for precision. And now I have journalists calling my office, asking whether I was compensated to attend your event. I have clients sending careful emails that are really asking whether I am still someone they can take seriously. I have people looking at my name online and seeing a prop instead of a professional. 7 years of work. 7 years of building something real, something earned, something that belonged to me. And in one night, you let someone else's story erase all of it." She was not raising her voice. She did not need to. The weight of what she was saying carried itself. "I did not sign up for any of that," she said. "No," Julian said. "You did not. Then I need you to correct it publicly. Tell them it was nothing. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. And then leave me alone." The room was quiet. The kind of quiet that Julian was already learning did not mean he was searching for words. It meant he was deciding how far into himself he was willing to reach, how much of the real thing he was willing to bring to the surface and lay on the table between them. "I do not want to perform any more," he said. She waited. She did not help him. She did not lean in or nod encouragingly or give him any of the small social signals that people use to make hard conversations easier. She simply stood and waited for him to say what he was going to say. "I walked into that gala planning to look like I had moved on. That was the whole design. I was going to be seen, composed, unaffected, in control. And then you said something on that dance floor that nobody has said to me in." He stopped, started again. "Nobody has spoken to me that honestly in longer than I can remember. And I came here because I do not know what to do with that. and I do not know how to say any of this without it sounding like just another calculation, another move. Another strategy dressed up in better words. It does sound like one, she said. I know, he said. A beat of silence. Then she asked the question that broke him. Then what do you want? He had prepared for most outcomes. He had walked into her office with contingencies for anger, for refusal, for negotiation, for the possibility that she would ask him to leave and never return. He had not prepared for that question, because the answer, the real answer, was not polished. It was not strategic. It was not useful in any framework he recognized. When he reached for it, all he found was space. Unfinished, formless. Honest in a way that frightened him, because honesty, real honesty, had never been something he could control. She watched his face, and she saw the moment he ran out of composure. It was not dramatic. It was not a collapse. It was just a small, unguarded thing in the center of all that control. A crack in the wall that let light through for the first time. Come back when you know, she said, and she turned and walked back into her office. The door closed behind her. No, slammed, just closed quietly, definitively, with the unmistakable sound of a woman who had said exactly what she meant and was done. Julian stood in the reception area for another moment. Then he left, but he came back, the next day, to her office. 5 days later, he showed up at the Community Arts Center in the Bronx, where Naomi volunteered every Saturday morning, teaching branding and storytelling to young entrepreneurs, kids from neighborhoods that never appeared in the pages of the magazines Julian's foundation events were covered in. Kids who were learning to tell their own stories in their own voices, and Naomi was the one helping them find those voices. He had found out about it the way he always found things out. Research. When Julian Mercer wanted to understand something, he studied it, he gathered information, he built a picture. It was, he would later admit, still a form of strategy, still an attempt to know before being known, but it was the closest thing he had to genuine curiosity, and for the first time in his life he was willing to let it lead him somewhere he had not planned. He did not approach her at the center. He did not announce himself. He spoke briefly with the program director, a woman named Grace, who had been running the center for 11 years on a budget that would not cover the catering at one of Julian's events. He asked about the programs. He listened to her answers with the kind of attention that Grace later described as the first time a rich person actually heard me when I talked. And then he left a check, a substantial one, earmarked specifically for the summer cohort. No press, no photo opportunity, no plaque. He walked out without making sure Naomi knew about it. She found out anyway, because Grace told her, because Grace was excited. Because the check meant that 12 more kids could participate in the summer program, and that they could finally replace the broken projector, and that maybe, just maybe, they could keep the lights on through September without another fundraising scramble. Naomi did not call Julian, but she stopped closing the door when his name came up. The following Wednesday, he called her. No script, no rehearsed version of what he wanted to say, no talking points drafted by a communications team. He simply called and spoke, and what came out of him was incomplete, occasionally contradictory, sometimes halting, and more honest than anything he had said to another person in years. He told her about Adrian. No, the public version. No, the press release version. The real version. He told her that Adrian had been chosen the way one chooses a merger partner, strategically, advantageously, with an eye toward optics and legacy, and the way their names would look on an invitation. Never for love. He told her he had known that from the beginning. Known it the way you know a room is cold when you walk into it, known it in his body before his mind had words for it. And he had done it anyway, because wanting something real had always felt, in his family, in his world, in the architecture of everything he had been taught, like the most dangerous form of weakness available. He told her about his father. No, the public biography. No, the foundation origin story. He told her about a man who rationed affection the way a general rations supplies, distributing it only when it served a strategic purpose and withdrawing it the moment it did not. He told her about growing up in a house where love was a language he was expected to speak but was never taught, where the only vocabulary available was performance, achievement, control, and silence. He told her that he understood something about himself that he had never said out loud, that the flowers, the donation, even this phone call were still forms of strategy, still echoes of a system he had inherited and internalized, and was only now beginning to see for what it was. He told her he was trying to learn the difference between pursuing someone and trying to control the outcome, and that he did not know if he was succeeding. Naomi listened to all of it. She did not interrupt. She did not reassure him. She did not tell him it was okay, because it was not okay yet, and she was not the kind of person who offered comfort before it was earned. When he finished, the line was quiet for a long time. "That is the first thing you have said to me that I actually believe," she said. He exhaled. It was quiet, barely audible, but she heard it, the sound of a man releasing something he had been holding for a very long time. "What do I do with that?" he asked. "Nothing yet," she said. "Just do not ruin it." If Julian thought the hardest part was over, he was wrong, because Adrian Langley moved fast, and she moved with the kind of precision that only someone who understands the machinery of reputation can achieve. 10 days after the gala, a piece appeared in one of the city's most widely read cultural columns. It was sourced anonymously. It was written with the careful, surgical ambiguity of someone who understood exactly where the line between implication and accusation lay and knew how to dance along it without ever stepping over. The piece suggested that Naomi Okafor had been preselected for the evening, that the dance had been choreographed in advance for press coverage, that Julian Mercer, fresh from a high-profile breakup, had simply found a more cooperative participant in his ongoing project of public image management, a willing prop, an arranged accessory, a woman who had been positioned, compensated, and deployed. Nothing in the article was provably false. That was the genius of it. Every sentence was structured to suggest without stating, to imply without committing, to plant a seed of doubt that would grow in the space between what was written and what was meant. It was the kind of journalism that could not be corrected, because it had never technically made a claim. It had only asked questions, and the questions were designed to do exactly what questions always do when they are asked loudly enough and often enough. They became answers. Naomi read the piece on a Wednesday morning. She sat at her kitchen counter with her laptop open and the article glowing on the screen, and she read it twice. Then she closed the laptop. She did not call Julian. She went through her entire day. She met with clients. She reviewed a proposal for a non-profit rebranding project. She responded to emails with the same professionalism and composure she had maintained every day for 7 years. And that evening, alone in her apartment with the city murmuring outside her window, she allowed herself to feel it. The specific, searing, deeply personal kind of anger that comes from being made into a character in someone else's story. Twice, first by the man who had used her as a shield, and then by the woman who resented that it had worked. Julian saw the article within the hour. He read it once and knew immediately. He had known Adrian long enough to recognize her fingerprints, the phrasing, the strategic ambiguity, the absence of anything actionable. It was her language, her architecture, built to wound without leaving marks that could be traced back to the hand that made them. His communications team called within 30 minutes. His legal counsel sent 3 messages by noon. 2 board members reached out before the end of the day, each recommending a measured, institutional response that expressed confidence in the foundation's reputation and stopped well short of addressing Naomi by name. The safe play was obvious. It had always been obvious to Julian: protect the institution, minimize exposure, control the frame. Redirect the narrative towards something manageable, something that did not require him to stand in front of a room and be honest. He had done it 100 times, 1,000 times. It was the reason the foundation existed in its current form. It was the reason the company had survived every crisis it had ever faced. It was the reason Julian Mercer existed in the form the world recognized: polished, composed, strategic, untouchable. He sat in his office for 3 hours. The city darkened outside his window. His phone continued to buzz with messages from people who wanted to help him make the smart choice, the safe choice, The Julian Mercer choice. He made no decision for 3 hours. And then he picked up the phone and scheduled a press briefing for the following morning. No, this is the moment everything comes down to. Julian has a choice. He can protect himself the way he has always done. He can issue a careful statement, redirect the narrative, let Naomi's name fade from the headlines, and move on with his reputation intact. Or he can do something he has never done before, something that will cost him, something that has no strategic upside, something that is simply, purely, terrifyingly honest. What do you think he chose? Before I tell you, hit that like button if this story has you locked in, because what happens next, I promise you, you will not see it coming. Naomi learned about the press briefing the night before. A mutual contact mentioned it in passing, not knowing the weight of what they were delivering. She did not call Julian. She did not ask what he planned to say. She did not offer input or guidance or the kind of strategic partnership that her professional instincts might have suggested. She decided she would watch. She would see who he chose to be when the cost was real, when the cameras were on and the room was full and the easy path was available, and no one would have blamed him for taking it. The briefing was small. 15 journalists seated in rows, his communications team standing off to one side with their phones in their hands and their expressions carefully neutral. A clean podium positioned in front of the foundation's logo, no teleprompter, no prepared remarks displayed on a screen, no safety net of any kind. Julian stood behind the podium without notes. A room was quiet in the way. Rooms are quiet when they are waiting for something they expect to be managed. He looked out at the journalists, and he began to speak. He said that the story circulating about the gala was false. He said it clearly, without qualification, without the careful hedging language that his legal team would have insisted on if they had been given the chance to review his remarks. He said that Naomi Okafor had not been approached before the event, had not been arranged, had not been compensated, had not been positioned or deployed or used in any capacity as part of a public relations strategy. He said that she was a professional of extraordinary capability who had done critical, meaningful work for the Arts Initiative's community engagement programs, work that had directly impacted the lives of young people across 3 boroughs, work that spoke for itself and deserved to be recognized on its own terms, not filtered through the lens of someone else's gossip. He said that what had happened between them on that dance floor had been his choice and his alone, that he had approached her, that he had asked her to dance, and that whatever the room had seen in that moment, whatever the cameras had captured, whatever narrative had been constructed from a single photograph, it had originated with him, no, with her. He said she owed him nothing. No, a performance, no, a continuation, no, a public role, no, a response, nothing. A journalist in the second row raised her hand. "Is this just another PR maneuver?" she asked. "Managing the story before it manages you." Julian looked directly at her. No, through her, no, past her, at her, with the same unguarded steadiness that Naomi had shown him on the night they danced. "No," he said. "This is the first honest thing I have done in years." The room went still. No, the polite, professional stillness of a press briefing proceeding according to plan. A different kind of stillness. The kind that happens when something unscripted, something real, breaks through the polished surface of a managed event, and everyone in the room recognizes it at the same time. He stepped back from the podium. And then he saw her. She was standing near the back of the room. She had come alone, quietly, without announcement, without telling him she would be there. She stood with her arms at her sides and her expression steady and her eyes on his face, and in that moment Julian understood something that all the strategy and control and calculation of his entire life had never taught him. You cannot earn trust by managing the outcome. You can only earn it by making a choice and accepting the consequences before you know what they will be. He did not know if she would stay. He had made this choice without knowing, without guarantees, without a contingency plan for what would happen if she walked out of that room and never looked back. That had been the point. She stayed. The journalists filed out. The communications team followed, already managing the aftermath on their phones. The room emptied slowly, the way rooms do when the event is over, but the energy of it has not yet dissipated. And when it was quiet, when it was just the two of them standing in a room with empty chairs and a podium and the fading sound of footsteps in the hallway outside, Naomi walked toward him. No quickly. No with the cinematic urgency of a grand gesture. No with the momentum that belongs in movie scenes where music swells and the audience knows the story is reaching its crescendo. She walked forward one deliberate step at a time, like someone who had thought carefully about every single one of those steps, like someone who understood the weight of what she was doing and refused to diminish it by rushing. She stopped in front of him. "You did not have to do that," she said. "I know you knew it would cost you." Yes. She looked at him for a long time, long enough for the silence to fill the space between them with something that neither of them tried to name or contain. She was reading something in his face, something she had been searching for since that first night at the gala, something she had almost given up on finding. "You do not get forever because you defended me," she said. He nodded. "I know that too. You get a chance." She let the words settle in the air like something fragile that needed to be handled with care. "One, that is what you get." He did not reach for her hand. He did not deliver a line designed to close the remaining distance between them. He did not do any of the things that the old Julian would have done. The strategic Julian, the Julian who knew how to manage every moment for maximum impact. He just stood there, inside the consequence of his own honesty. No, trying to make it smaller than it was. No, trying to make it bigger, just standing in it, holding it be what it was. And she saw it. The thing she had been looking for underneath all the composure and calculation and control. No, a performance, no, a strategy, just a man, standing in his own truth, unfinished, unpolished, imperfect, real. 4 weeks later, there was a small gathering at the Community Arts Center in the Bronx. It was nothing like the gala. No photographers, no donors in designer suits, no press releases. No crystal chandeliers or string quartets, or waitstaff moving in rehearsed patterns. Just program participants and a few volunteers, and a folding table covered in potluck dishes that had been brought in containers that did not match. Dishes that had been made in home kitchens by people who cooked because they wanted to feed someone, not because they were trying to impress anyone. Someone had connected a small speaker to a phone and put on something slow, an old soul record, warm and unhurried, the kind of song that does not demand your attention, but rewards it if you give it, the kind of song that makes you want to sway even if you are standing still, the kind of song that sounds like it was written by someone who understood that the best love songs are not loud. They are quiet, they are patient, they trust you to find them. Naomi was laughing with one of the young women in the program, a real laugh, unarchitected, unperformed. The kind of laugh that comes from the center of someone who is comfortable in their skin and present in their moment and not thinking about who might be watching. Julian appeared beside her. He did not interrupt. He stood quietly and waited until the conversation found its natural pause, and then he looked at her. "Dance with me," he said. She recognized the words. She looked at him the same way she had the first night, taking her time, letting him wait. Letting the silence stretch just long enough to feel like a choice being made in real time, not a reaction but a decision, deliberate and free and entirely her own. Then she smiled. No wide, no performed, no, the kind of smile that is designed to be seen from across a room, just a small, honest thing that lived in the corners of her mouth, and nowhere else, a smile that belonged to him. No, because he had earned it through strategy, but because he had earned it through the slow, painful, unglamorous process of becoming someone worthy of it. "Yes," she said, and this time no cameras turned, no room shifted, no headline was waiting on the other side of the moment. There was no ex watching from across the floor, with a calculated laugh and an ivory dress, and a man on her arm chosen for maximum provocation. There was no strategy underneath the asking, there was no agenda underneath the answer. Just two people, standing in a room that smelled like home cooking, and sounded like old soul music, and felt like the kind of place where real things happen. Two people who had found each other inside the wreckage of something calculated and had chosen carefully, imperfectly, honestly, to build something real instead. Something that did not need an audience to matter. Something that did not need a podium or a press briefing or a photographer to be true. Something that started not with a grand gesture, but with the smallest and most radical act available to two people learning to trust each other. A single, honest dance. And here is what I want to leave you with. Julian Mercer's story is not just a love story. It is a story about the walls we build and the moment we choose to let someone see what is behind them. It is about the difference between performing love and practicing it, between managing how people see you and letting someone actually see you. Julian spent his whole life speaking the language of control because it was the only language he was ever taught. And it worked. It built an empire. It built a reputation. It built a life that looked from the outside like everything anyone could ever want. But it did not build connection. It did not build trust. It did not build the kind of love that survives when the cameras are off and the press releases stop, and you are just two people in a room trying to figure out how to be honest with each other. Naomi did not save Julian. That is important to understand. She did not fix him. She did not complete him. She did not perform the emotional labor of dismantling his walls for him. What she did was something far more powerful and far more rare. She stood in front of him and told him the truth. And then she waited to see what he would do with it. The strongest thing Julian ever did was not building his foundation. It was not standing at that podium. It was not even the press briefing, though that took more courage than anything he had done in his professional life. The strongest thing Julian Mercer ever did was walk into a small office in Harlem and stand in a room where his wealth meant nothing, and his name meant nothing, and his control meant nothing, and let a woman tell him who he actually was. And instead of defending himself, instead of managing the moment, instead of reaching for a strategy, he listened. That is where love begins. No, in the grand gesture. No, in the choreographed moment. No, in the photograph that goes viral or the headline that gets clicks. Love begins in the willingness to be seen without a script, to stand in front of someone with nothing prepared and say, I do not know what I am doing, but I am here. If you are still performing for the people around you, if you are still treating love like something to be managed instead of something to be lived, if you are still building walls and calling them strength, this story is for you. If this story touched you, if there was a moment that made you pause, that made you think about someone, that made you feel something real, I need you to do something for me. Hit that like button. Drop a comment telling me which moment hit you the hardest. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you have not already, subscribe to this channel, because every single week I bring you stories like this, stories about love, about growth, about becoming the person you were always meant to be. I am Mr. Andy, and I will see you in the next one.